Does the 21-point peace proposal get signed off today by Benjamin Netanyahu?
I doubt it will be signed off today. My guess, however, is that he will say yes, but. There are elements in it that he is not going to like. Number one, there is a provision that talks about if there's reform of the Palestinian Authority, it could help to create the conditions for a Palestinian state. That's obviously highly qualified, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very clear, no Palestinian state. There is a role for the Palestinian Authority, not the one they want in Gaza. They want to be running Gaza. They will not be, but they will be participants in what would be a regional and international interim administration, interim international administration. That's not something that he wants. Those are two things that stand out, in addition to Prime Minister Netanyahu has clearly wanted an outcome where Hamas is seen as effectively surrendering. Now, this 21 points, there'd be plenty in it that Hamas doesn't like, because the truth is, at the end of the day, they won't be running Gaza even indirectly. And if it works the way it should work, they will also not be in a position where they can reconstitute themselves. But Bibi won't have his figurative, if not literal, surrender of Hamas. He has wanted that as a way to show he has an unmistakable victory, what he called total victory. So there's a reality that this will not be simple for him, but I don't think he can say no to President Trump for two reasons. One,
well, that's important.
Well, I think it's critical. I just don't think he can say no. In a way, it was possible for him to say no to President Biden. With President Trump, just from a political standpoint, the Republicans will not stand up and support him against President Trump. With President Biden, the Republicans were guaranteed to stand up with him against President Biden. So he doesn't have a political alternative here, number one. Number two, the reality is President Trump did what other presidents have not done. He acted militarily directly against the Iran nuclear program, taking out, really destroying the three most important elements of the Iran nuclear infrastructure in Fordo, in Natanz, and in Isfahan. Now, for Bibi, the issue of Iran has always been the most important issue. But for him to be able to say no to Trump in the aftermath of that, I think, isn't in the cards. So he will not say no, but not saying no is not quite the same as saying yes.
Okay. White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner apparently met with Benjamin Netanyahu for hours yesterday. They met in New York to try to grease the skids on something happening today. What could have been hammered out in that meeting?
I think what they would have been addressing are the major concerns that Bibi has, which include some of the things I've mentioned. They might say, look, we have buy-in from the Arabs, so we can't change these to the point where we would lose the Arabs, but let's talk about ways we could address your concerns. Knowing Prime Minister Netanyahu as I do, at a minimum, aside from wanting to not close this without having further negotiations to be more precise on what each of these provisions means, I can also see him ask for side letters of assurance. So that oftentimes in a negotiation, we used to do this all the time with him and with the Israelis even before him. If we couldn't reach an agreement on something, but we agreed that he or his predecessor had a legitimate concern, we would provide a letter of assurance. I'll give you an example of one that you could see here. That Israel would have the right to respond militarily if Hamas was reconstituting itself, or if, for example, smuggling wasn't being cut off. I could see a commitment to the Israelis put in writing that would allow them to act if this interim international administration for Gaza was not acting in the way that it needed to. That would certainly be something I could anticipate. And I would imagine yesterday was mostly about going through each of the areas where he had a problem, their ways of trying to discuss ameliorating that, and if not, being able to fully address his concerns, talking about the kind of assurances that the administration would give him.
Yeah. Ambassador, I've only got a couple of minutes, so I just want to warn you so I don't have to cut you off here. But we've got a news conference, a bilateral newser that's supposed to follow hours of meetings here, at least a couple of hours. There was some thought that they may not take questions from the press. What should we expect when these two walk before reporters today? And what would you ask President Trump about this today?
Yeah, I would say, if this is, have you been able today to remove all of the questions that Prime Minister Netanyahu has raised? And is it possible to address those questions without losing the Arabs? That's what I would ask. And by the way, that suggests to me that what you've heard about them possibly not taking questions seems to me to be quite plausible, because there may not be really good answers to some of the questions, or you may just choose not to respond to the questions. So I could see them each making statements, putting the best light on this. Bibi is going to want to look like he's working things out with the president, that they have this superb relationship, and Israel is able to count on President Trump. I think there'll be a bunch of superlatives that he offers when talking about President Trump. And President Trump, I think, his natural inclination is to take credit that we now have an agreement. By the way, that actually could be a smart thing to do. I'll say this by just wrapping it up. It makes it harder for Bibi then to resist if Trump is saying we have a deal, as opposed to him saying leaving it open in some fashion.